The Three Down Greencast is brought to you by the Pile of Bones Brewing Company, Regina's only downtown brewery.
But it's easy to talk about. It's easy to sum it up when you just talk about practice. We sitting here, I'm supposed to be the franchise player, and we're in here talking about practice. Well, Coach, I mean, listen, we're talking about practice. Not a game. We talking about practice.
Ah, yes, the brave and smart words of the answer, Allen Iverson, as we will, in fact, today talk about practice. In a little bit, as we usually do, we will mumble on a little bit first, but there was the news that broke today, as usual, recording on a Tuesday night, and Chris Jones had a few choice words for his team at practice this afternoon, halting the affair, and Brett Labatt with some interesting comments to reporters as well after. So we're certainly going to get into that a little bit, as there is a distinct possibility, though, that this podcast could be interrupted in the middle of it because, well, we haven't really been practicing either.
No, we certainly have never really practiced. And hey, I mean, I find it extra fitting because we're not talking about the game. We're talking about practice because there's no game to talk about. So it's just the words of Allen Iverson. It's like a prophecy come true for our little podcast on 3downnation.com.
Yes, and we've been pretty lucky so far, actually. For the most part, I remember Josh Smith and the guys, they would always seem to have Ticat News break after they recorded the show. And I know a few other podcasts have had that happen to them as well. We've been pretty lucky so far where stuff tends to happen on the day where we record so far. Now, because I've said that, that probably means next Wednesday the Riders are going to do something crazy and we're going to miss it for a whole week. But I guess that's just the world of podcasting and you have to live with it.
Yeah. Thanks, Joel. Like, way to completely and utterly curse us, because you know that, like, if the Riders were to go in a different direction with anything, that they're going to go ahead and now announce it on a Wednesday, probably just because Ryan Pollock, I'm sure, has certainly listened to this podcast, as I'm positive he has, the director of media for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and he'll do it just to spite us.
Yeah, I'm not so sure he actually wastes his time listening to us. We don't really add anything of interest to the conversation.
Nor do I think he'd try to spite us in any way. I think, we all, pretty good terms. He's a good guy,
Yeah, sure. Well, we'll go with that. Anyway, as we always do to open the show, John, I hope you're back from your 1 week hiatus from drinking, as I hope maybe you've sobered up enough now that maybe you can stomach a beer this week. What's in the glass?
Oh, I am definitely back to stomaching beers. It started last night, went out for a work dinner, and had Blackbridge's Uno IPA.
Oh, good one.
So tasty,
so
into
good.
My face. I had to pick some up on the way home from work today, and that is what I'm drinking tonight. So yes, very much, if you're an IPA fan, Blackbridge out of Saskatoon, the Uno
Swift Current.
IPA.
Blackbridge is out of Swift Current.
Well, there, I have completely screwed that up. I just thought, maybe I just want them to be out of Saskatoon. Maybe I just want them to be like my neighbor, and they can just like knock on the door and like, hey, John, here's some beer. And I can be like, cool, neighbor, that's a brewery. Could you, like, why? I don't know why you have your brewery in a residential area, but cool beans.
I'm pretty
Cheers.
sure I think the city would probably have some zoning questions about that, but,
Probably.
So we have a weird thing when it comes to us and our beers, as there always seems to be some kind of connection. It's like we have some kind of beer telepathic communication, or whatever the hell I'm talking about here. I'm not drinking the Uno, but I am drinking essentially the beer that inspired the Uno, which is the Blackbridge Double IPA.
Oh.
Because the story is the Uno IPA is just a single version of the Blackbridge Double IPA.
Right.
So I was looking around the store today at work, and I felt like something a little stronger today, a little malty, a little juicy. It's just a great all-around beer, and I thought, you know what, I haven't had one of these in a while. Let's go for it and mix it up a little bit tonight. So that's what happened there.
And that's actually kind of cool with the beer telepathy we have, because, like, we text each other about a lot of sports things.
Yes.
But rarely do we ever text about beer, especially before the program. So it's just beer telepathy strikes again. Ooh, mind powers.
Absolutely. And just so you know, yes, Glenn and the gang at Pile of Bones, our official sponsors, are fine with this. They they know the guys down in Swift Current, and they love Blackbridge as much as we do. So we're free still to drink whatever we want. Still love you though, guys. Glenn, Pile of Bones. You guys are the best.
See, and that is why Pile of Bones is such a great sponsor of this podcast. They know that we're beer lovers and football lovers and talking lovers, and they let us. They're not going to sit there and say, "Hey, all you can drink is Pile of Bones." I mean, we drink a lot of Pile of Bones, but that's a cool thing. I gotta again tip my cap to those guys, and gentle reminder of still waiting on my beer shipment.
Yeah, you'll get it. Don't worry.
Perfect.
Now, speaking of getting it and not worrying, we can't be saying that about the Saskatchewan Roughriders right now and their practice.
No.
Did like a hurricane just blow through your basement there?
No, I just exhaled deeply.
Okay. Was that like a sigh about practice, or like,
it was. It was just like it was a sigh of. I think the move is very cliche, but I'll let you describe what happened for maybe the listeners that don't know what happened. It's almost a sigh of like, okay, guys, like I feel like Chris Jones and co are maybe running out of moves, and I feel like today was just another move. But you go on to what happened, and then I'll get into my thoughts on the matter.
So practice today they're getting ready for the game Thursday against Hamilton, as teams do, and there was a point in time in practice where Chris Jones just had enough. He halted the whole thing, and as described by CJME's Ariels, the riot act was read. Now, of course, what was actually said, either they couldn't heard or they probably weren't going to report, but regardless, the individual words weren't really that important. What mattered was the overall message, and we've seen this time and time again, and it seems like this has kind of been building. It's been an ongoing thing for a little bit. Brennan Labatt told reporters after the game, including Ariel, that it's kind of been, they've been on for a day, off for a day, on for a day, and he described the whole thing, like their practice regiment, not Chris Jones's reaction. He said, quote, "It's garbage." So, it's not the first time a coach has done this. It won't be the last time, but I think Chris Jones is clearly trying to send a message to his team right now after their play during games has kind of been how like they practice, where it's been good at times, bad at times, and that's just been reflected in their practice clearly.
But this goes back to training camp. From all accounts, from every practice that they've had, this has been a mostly veteran group that's kind of relaxed, maybe a little sloppy at times, maybe guys, giving each other a hard time over dropping stuff. This seems very. And I remember watching several football coaches doing this as kind of a wake-up call. And I remember Corey Chamberlain doing it, near the season of his demise several times at training camp. It just, I don't know. It seems like the bye week was spent festering anger rather than solving problems for the team. And Daryl Davis wrote it on the website, on 3 Down Nation, that rather than going out and maybe addressing some of the offensive line depth or the defensive backs depth or some of those other positions we've talked about almost since training camp, it's like, okay, well, I didn't fix any of this, so I'm just going to robble, and hope that they can fix this problem, fix the way the team is playing heading out of a bye week. I mean, if you've been around a football team that returns from a bye week at any single level, things are definitely going to be sloppy. But that's a speech you have to the guys before the first practice. Not when you're in the middle of the week and things aren't quite going your way. Your last practice, I do believe, before they actually go and have, a walkthrough in a hotel room before Hamilton. I think the move is cliche, and it's a distraction from maybe, some of the things that this team needs to fix.
Distraction might be the key word here. Maybe Chris Jones saw this as an opportunity to change the narrative around his team a little bit, rather than today where they were, there was no questions. There probably was questions about Deron Carter and the offensive line and all that, but it didn't become the story. It wasn't the story that all the beat reporters posted to their websites today. It was Chris Jones doing what he did at practice. So, he's calculated enough that maybe that's something that crossed his mind, and I think to a degree what happened here for the while was Chris Jones was hoping that the veterans on this team and this team would sort out these issues themselves. He's been often described as a player's coach, and so he doesn't need to stop practice every time something goes wrong to berate his players. So I feel like he was kind of hoping that these problems would maybe solve themselves internally, and he wouldn't have to get involved until he had to. And Tuesday just felt like the day where he had to get involved and send that message heading into what is going to be a tough game in Hamilton.
Yeah, certainly. I think you're right on the narrative point. Do you think maybe, and this is part of a greater discussion, that Chris Jones is maybe starting to feel the heat for the first time really in his professional coaching career north of the border? I mean, could that be building? Could that be festering with him? Because let's face it, when they brought him on board, he was basically given a couple of years of carte blanche where you knew that, he could do whatever he want. The team could finish however they want. But I'm always wondering if an aspect of this isn't Chris Jones spent a week realizing for the first time in a very, very long time his job could potentially be in trouble if this season, and again, we're talking about a 500 football team in the division where everybody's within.
Well, the league basically, the whole league.
Yeah.
There's Calgary, there's Montreal, and there's everyone else.
Exactly, but something just seems amiss in Riderville, and I think that Jones is maybe starting to feel the pressure. I remember when he first came to town, everything was generally positive and glowy about the whole new regime, and it seems like the shine and the luster has worn off a little bit. They're just the stories we're getting and the things we're seeing, like the Tuesday outburst. You think that maybe he's starting to feel, it's like when you turn on your barbecue at first. It's cold at first, a little bit of heat starts rising. Next thing you know, sizzle, sizzle, sear, 700 degrees. I don't think it's at 700 degrees yet, but I think you're starting to feel a little bit of the heat coming from underneath for first time. As a coordinator, he never would have felt this kind of pressure. As a head coach in Edmonton, he was generally extremely successful. Mm-hmm. So is this his way of dealing with it, of deflecting, of putting it back on the players? I don't know.
I think that's a fair point. And, he was a coordinator in Calgary and he's a coordinator in Toronto, which, especially Toronto, the market is not what it is here. You're not in the fishbowl. You're not under scrutiny every single day. So really this whole Duron Carter on defense instead of offense scenario is really probably, at least in terms of the public eye. I'm sure in football circles there's been plenty that he's had to deal with and plenty of circumstances that he's had to overcome. But in terms of football decisions that in terms of the public eye, this Duron Carter thing might be the biggest heat he's faced for a lot in the CFL, at least. I'm sure down in the South when he was working down there's scrutiny probably over every single decision because that's the way it is down in the Southern United States. But, I think that's a fair point, and there's right to be some heat on Chris Jones, I think, based on some of the decisions he's made. And ultimately, I think that this is why in the offseason the team only gave him the 1-year extension. He wasn't going to be a lame duck head coach, so it wasn't, okay, if things go wrong, you're 100% gone. There's still a chance you could be back next year. But this was very much, I think, a prove-it year for Chris Jones. They didn't necessarily have to win the Grey Cup, though I'm sure that was laid out as the expectation. There at least had to be the continued improvement that we've seen from year 1 to year 2 into now year 3. So yeah, maybe he's feeling the heat a little bit, and coaches, you see it across all sports, coaches tend to get a little squirrely when the heat rises a little bit, and they tend to double down on the mistakes they keep making, which is kind of what we've seen through the last few weeks of the regular season, and it brings up the overall discussion of the roster management of this team and how, generally speaking, after bye weeks, you see teams come back with a renewed sense of energy, a renewed strategy, and they do go back, and as Glenn Suter of TSN likes to say, they did some self-scouting, they looked at what they're doing well, what they're doing wrong, and adjust. And I'm sure schematically and some different things, Chris Jones alluded to it today, that some things are going to be different, but personnel wise really they're not, and that's kind of surprising. So they have a guy on defense that they signed that can play DB, but he's still not going to play. Well, why did you sign him, what was that, 2-3 weeks ago now? Shouldn't that be enough time to be able to play at least some man coverage at cornerback in the CFL?
You would think so, but again, I think this all comes back to my rant and I'll try not to talk about it too long, but I think the motivation is Jones wants Carter to succeed to prove that he can be a genius, and Carter wants to succeed because I'm sure that somebody down south has told him, we have zero interest in you as a receiver, but we believe you have the physical tools as a defensive back, and they're both sticking to their guns, and that's a big reason why he came back, and I've said it before, and that can be the only logical reason. I know another move that was panned a little bit was the Eddie Steele move. Him practicing along offensive line. But again, the Canadian depth isn't quite there. And I do think having a defensive lineman that's dressed in a football game, versatile enough to play both sides of the ball potentially, is extremely valuable.
Absolutely.
Let's face it, on the game day roster, they're 1, maybe 2 injuries away from getting really into desperation mode for the toughest position on the field to play.
Not even that many. One injury in their screw. Generally, they haven't been dressing backups. So
exactly. So I like the Eddie Steele practice move because, again, there are no other viable options. And again, I've never played along the offensive or defensive lines. And feel free to correct me in the comments section, Twitter, whatever. I feel like switching sides on the line would be a little bit easier than switching from receiver to defensive back. That's just me from what I've perceived from watching football for many years. Again, I never had the opportunity to play O-line, D-line, but it just strikes me as something that could be done easier. That's why I kind of like the Steele move, and, we know my thoughts on Duron Carter.
Yeah, I think the Eddie Steele situation is far different than Duron Carter at DB and far different than changing the quarterback every 3 possessions.
Yeah.
Those are two very different scenarios because we've seen, especially it was a couple years ago in Calgary where they had like 12 offensive linemen injured and they had they had defensive linemen move over and their offensive line kept playing well. So I think Eddie Steele is capable of doing that. And he's played some offensive line in the past, not in the CFL, but he's done a little bit apparently in his football life. So it's not completely foreign to him. And I think it's a different speed down there. It's a different mindset. And I think you can get that. If you're going from receiver to DB, you suddenly have to learn to just the basics of running backwards. That's not really a thing. You have to start walking backwards as an offensive lineman, but it's a lot easier to learn to walk backwards than to run backwards.
Yeah.
Again, out to lunch, I could be completely wrong. I've also never played offensive line. So that to me, that's a completely different scenario, and one that I will give credit for Chris Jones for. Number one, I still think there should be an extra natural offensive lineman on the roster, but if you have a guy like Eddie Steele who can fill in for Zach Evans if something happens, or fill in for an offensive lineman if something happens, considering how smaller the CFL roster is compared to an NFL roster and NCAA roster, then that's a 100% good move, and I have no problems there. And to me, and it's a discussion that's come up on Twitter a little bit, I saw someone ask the question to Herb Zurkowsky of the Montreal Gazette. And so I'm just bringing this on you right now, John, because it just came to my mind. Why are the scratches still a thing?
I don't know.
So that you dress a 46-man roster, 2 guys for some reason get scratched. It used to be 4, which was absurd. You're down to 42 for a game. So now it's 44. You scratch 2 guys. They still get a game check for that game. Why not just let all 46 guys dress?
I have no idea in the slightest, and it's never made a lick of sense to me. I mean, it's not quite as bad as the National Lacrosse League where they scratch 1 guy off their game day roster, but it just, you're right, there's no justification for it. It's not like I understand at some lower levels of football, for example, in the Canadian Junior Football League, you're only allowed to travel so many players to not give teams with more money an unfair advantage, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
that makes sense.
But in this day and age in the CFL, everybody is traveling with the exact same guys. They're making the trip anyways. No, I'm absolutely with you. It's one of those things that makes no sense. I mean, those guys count against the cap. I mean, you'd think the PA would want their guys playing. You think it seems like a no-brainer. I mean, just like making quarterbacks count towards the ratio seems like a no-brainer. Talking about things that we did like so far that the Riders have done, though. And I said this when to drop this when I was on CTV here in Saskatoon earlier this week.
Humble brag.
Humble brag, of course. One thing I did like, and I'm almost wondering if this isn't going to, if this isn't the team maybe making the decision that, okay, it's time to pick a guy going forward, is the fact that basically Sunday was day one of practice, and it was Bridges starting. There was no, I mean, all the rhetoric is still the rotation could continue, but, we're told on Sunday for a Thursday game who the starting quarterback could be. Now, me being optimistic, I'm hoping this means that they're going to ride or die with Brandon Bridge a little bit. Let the guy figure it out. Let him see a game. Let him play a game. But maybe I'm just being optimistic, because I think whether it's Bridge or whether it's Watford, I think one of those guys needs to be the guy moving forward. And I like the fact that as early as they could, they said, "You're the guy."
Yeah. Well, I believe Chris Jones did that last week as well. Pretty much his first availability after game day. I think he said that the week before, after the last game. So that's to be taken as is.
Right.
That's kind of our talk about the Riders this week, because, I mean, it was a bye week and there wasn't a whole lot to talk about. But the conversation about them does kind of continue a little bit, because last time they played was on Thursday Night Football. 2 weeks later, they're playing on Thursday Night Football again, on the road this time, though, against the same team. Now, it's an interesting little quirk in the schedule, and it's the one time that maybe Thursday Night Football works out for teams, because for the first time in a number of years, we have multiple teams on a bye week at the same time. For the last few years, it was one team was on a bye every week. Because I remember back when there was 8 teams in the league, they would have half the league have a bye one week and the other half the other week, and that was their byes for the year. So it was interesting to see 3 teams have a bye last week, and the same 2 teams meet on Thursday Night Football in 2 of the last 3 weeks. Now, this isn't a question about, how the schedule is working, because I think the extra week and the extra bye week is good for the players and good for the league. But my question to you, John, is, do you care about Thursday Night Football? Is Thursday Night Football go-to television that the CFL and TSN is hoping to create? Because I think a number of years ago, they took a leap of faith with Friday Night Football. Yeah. And this was back before TSN was even the exclusive rights holder. They made that TSN's night, and that was the go-to night eventually for CFL football. And you could make the argument that maybe that decision for Friday Night Football eventually landed TSN the exclusive rights for how good of a job they did with that broadcast and how it became the thing. So now they're trying to push Thursday night, and this isn't a question about the broadcast. I want to get this clear right now. I think TSN, the league, and everything, whether it actually works or not is yet to be seen. It's far too early to tell. But the formatical change they've made with Thursday Night Football, I applaud them for trying something to get some people interested. The concert series has been interesting and fun. Kate Burness is amazing, and she should be on more stuff on TSN regardless.
100%.
And, I mean, Rod Smith doing some games on play-by-play is always great. So they've made some good changes there. And we'll see whether that works. The sample size is far too small at this point to say if it'll turn into rating success. I just wonder if Thursday night is a night for football in general, because we've seen people in Saskatchewan complain about it. I've seen fans of other teams across the league after they've hosted a Thursday night football game say, "Well, I'm glad we're done with that now," because even Ottawa, who sold out essentially every game since they've come back into the CFL, had struggles selling out their Thursday night football game. So I just wonder if. Why is this continuing to be forced to be a thing? I understand it's going to happen sometimes because that's the way the CFL schedule has always worked, but does it need to be a mainstay every single week?
I don't think so. I would agree with you on every single count. And again, speaking from my limited experience, I know here in Saskatchewan, obviously, you're not going to travel from Lloydminster. You got to take 2. If you're coming from Lloydminster, hell, even parts of Saskatoon, PA, as people do in this province, for a Thursday night home game, you're looking at 2 days off.
Yeah,
you're looking at taking the Thursday off of work, the Friday off of work. Do you really want to burn 2 holiday days in the middle of summer to, drive down to Regina? Winnipeg, it's a logistical nightmare to get to games. Everybody has to park and ride. There's nowhere to park unless you want to, like my buddy Neely, hike 20 minutes from a Superstore parking lot every single game. I just find myself, and this is one thing I don't know if the league really accounts for, but it seems like I know my business being, the automotive business. I know here in Saskatoon, every single dealership is open late on Thursday till 9 o'clock, right? I know a lot of the insurance agents we deal with are open until 9 o'clock. It seems to me like Thursday night has kind of become the token for retail. We're open late night. That's kind of the first night. A lot of malls are open late. It's commonplace across all of Canada for car dealers to be open late, and some subsequent industries. Your bars and stuff like that. Thursday night, it's one of those things that sneaks up on me.
Mm-hmm.
I'll make a plan on a Friday night to get together, friends, family, whatever, to watch a Rider game, a Bomber game. Same with Saturday. If you've got a Saturday off, it's like, hey, game's at 7. Let's make our plans kind of around that. Let's have a good time, so on and so forth. But Thursday night's one of those things. It's like, that's on, isn't it? Huh. I guess I should tune it on. I don't know. It just doesn't seem to fit. It doesn't seem to fit in the NFL. On top of that, it's really mucking with the schedules. You got some players that are playing on Sunday, that on Thursday it's happening on a regular basis. I miss the Friday night football consistent doubleheader. That should be a thing. I like Saturday games. I think Sunday afternoon games should be a regular thing in the summer here in Canada, especially if you want to start bringing in that real young generation of fans. Again, I get it. When the NFL season launches, you want to stay away from Sundays as often as you can, but even myself, I want to take my 2.5-year-old son to a Rider game. So I got looking. I've made this decision a couple weeks ago that he's old enough to go. And there's only one Sunday home game, because, again, I work Saturdays, that I can potentially take him to. And I am happy to say, I'll be going to the Sunday, August the 19th against Calgary. But for a lot of young families, Thursday night doesn't work. For people that want to go out and just drink beer and have a good time, Thursday night doesn't work. For people that have to work, Thursday night doesn't work. As a whole, Thursday night on the schedule does not work, and I echo all your sentiments on the broadcast. What Kate Burness has brought as a panel host is fun. It's that non-serious kind of she brings enough credibility to be serious. She can have a great football discussion, but she knows to make the broadcast fun. Rod Smith is a play-by-play guy. Wow, he is good. He is really good. And they're doing so many good things with the broadcast, and I think it's going to be a shame that, the whole concept is going to be hurt by the day of the week it's on. And I am strongly against Thursday night football. I think it needs to go away in a hurry.
Yeah, and I think it's reflected in that. The ratings, last week, it was a ratings bonanza, but that's because the Riders won the game, so Saskatchewan tuned in.
Yeah.
The ratings haven't been great. No one's really knocking down the door to go to games. And so, it, as you said, it sneaks up on you, and I miss a lot of games too because of work and other commitments that I generally have on Thursday nights, and there is the side of me that says all that, but maybe I'm being too much of a football fan and not looking at the other side, because, and I made this point on Twitter to some other people when the new kind of format on Thursdays launched this year, was the idea, if what they're essentially targeting with this broadcast is college and university kids, right?
Yes.
And I remember when I was in college and university, Thursday night was the night to go out and have fun and forget the end of the night, right?
Yes.
So in that in that regard, the theory makes sense. I just wonder, because this is still a fairly gate-driven league, if the balance is swung too far the other way in trying to appease that crowd rather than keeping who you have happy while drawing in that party crowd. Because I think you can still get that crowd on a Friday or a Saturday.
Oh, 100% you can. I think if you took that broadcast and that panel and everything in the concert series and everything you're trying to do to bring in the younger demographic on Thursday night and moved it to Friday in some capacity, whether it's just for the early game, whether you bring in the other panel for the late game, I know logistical nightmares and so on and so forth, or you make it Saturday night football and see, I've always thought, and this is just me as an aside, I've thought that, U Sports needs to get out of the Sportsnet deal, partner up with TSN, and I've always thought if you could do 2 CFL games on Friday night, TSN has a U Sports broadcast followed by a fun Saturday night broadcast, and wrap up your week with a Sunday game. That is the way football should be broadcast in this country.
Yeah. I think that makes perfect logical sense. We've had the U Sports discussion on this podcast before, and I just think overall Thursday night, and this isn't a slam on the CFL, this isn't a slam on CFL fans. this is a problem across football, because if you look down south, there's an a double NCAA game on Thursday nights, but it's between, Woodsy of CJME's favorite school, Middle Utah State, and some other school that no one's ever heard of. I mean, they're generally fun football games. I tend to watch it sometimes because I'm a football nut, and those games tend to be weird and wacky, and that's why I love them. But generally speaking, no one watches them. Thursday Night Football in the NFL, when they do it, there's 3 types of people who watch that game. Number 1, reluctant fans of those teams who say, sigh, we'll watch because it's our team, but we still don't really like Thursday Night Football. Number 2, the degenerate gamblers, because they'll put money on anything, so yes, they will watch this football game. And number 3 are the fantasy freaks. Now, in the CFL, gambling and fantasy are there, but they're not really there to the same level in the NFL, so you've already kind of canceled that out a little bit as a core people that are watching this game. All you have are the reluctant fans. And so it just hasn't really, I think, to this point, and we've had a few years of Thursday Night Football to talk about it now, it just hasn't really caught on. And there's a player safety issue to this too, because you touched on it as well. This is a rare phenomenon this week where both teams playing on Thursday night have had 2 weeks off before this game, so that's great. It'll probably be a little sloppy at first, but we know that these guys are properly rested coming into this game. And I think, and I've talked about this with some friends about the CFL versus the NFL, and an issue that has always plagued this league has been the inconsistent scheduling and how you could have as many as 8 days off between games or have as little as 4 days off in between games, and how we think that leads to maybe a few more injuries in the CFL compared to the NFL, because in the NFL you'll have maybe one Thursday night game and maybe a couple Monday nighters a year, depending on what team you are. Like if you're a popular team that people watch, that's generally what you're looking at. If you're a team that no one watches, you're going to play every Sunday and you're fine.
Yeah.
So for the most part, let's say roughly 80% of your schedule, you're going to be playing on Sunday. You have the proper rest and you have your ritual every single week that you go through. In the CFL, you don't have that. And I understand that they're not going to play all 4 games on the same day. That's fine. But you've said it, and I think we've all said, and everyone said it, and I'm willing to be flexible to a degree because I understand stadium availability, blah, 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 that they can't play a doubleheader on every single Friday and Saturday.
No,
but in a perfect world, that should be the bulk of the schedule. Let's forget Thursdays, and as much as we can outside of Montreal late in the season, because for some reason they don't want the Alouettes playing on McGill during school hours or something, get rid of Sundays as well. Let's just play doubleheaders on Fridays and Saturdays.
Yeah, as you said, as much as you can.
Yeah, but I mean, again, well, I applaud the league for trying something different. I don't think it's going to work.
The numbers are saying it doesn't work. But if they went back to double headers, then I'd have to prepare my liver, and who knows if I'd survive.
Well, we already saw what happened to you after 1 week away, so double headers might be a bit much.
It's true. I'm too soft.